Hello Year 10. Today's lesson is the second of our 4 lessons on the reading section of English Language Paper 1, the fiction paper. I'm Miss Crump and I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to teach you again today. For today's lesson, you will need your workbook and a pen. If you have them, some coloured highlighters would also be useful. You also need to mute your social media notifications so you can really concentrate. If you need to, press pause while you get yourself organised, and then when you're ready, press play to move on. I'd now like you to work through your do now. Again, remember it only helps drive the information into your long-term memory if you try to do it without looking back at your notes. Press pause, answer as much as you can, and then when you're ready, press play to move on. The ways in which a piece of writing is put together, how it's built, is called structure. The start of the text and how it engages the reader is called the opening. When ideas are repeated in different parts of the text, that's called repetition. When the storyteller or the narrative voice uses he, she or they, but they're limited in what they can report, that's called third-person limited narration, and writers often use it when they're focusing on one character's point of view, but not using their own words. When the storyteller uses he, she or they to tell the story, but they are able to know everything, so can see characters' thoughts and move from place to place, that's called omniscient narration. Omniscient means all-seeing or all-knowing. When the writer holds back certain information to reveal it at a later point, that's withholding information. And when they start the story in the middle of an event, only to move backwards and forwards so they can choose when to tell the reader certain things, that's known as in medias res. Circularity or cyclical structure is when the ending links back to the beginning, and time references are also known as temporal references. When we talk about changes or developments in ideas or perspectives, we call them shifts. And when we place two ideas next to each other for effect, that's juxtaposition. Finally, when the writer drops hints about things that will happen later, that's called foreshadowing. If you missed any of these, make sure you revise your writer's methods knowledge organiser carefully, as you will need all these terminology at some point. Press pause to mark your answers and then press play when you're ready to move on. Today we're going to be focusing on question 3, and our objectives are, firstly, to deepen our understanding of text structure. Secondly, to identify sequence and structural features. And thirdly, to comment on the effect of structure. For a high mark in question 3, you're being asked again to analyse how the text works. Remember, analysis means to break something down into tiny pieces, examine those pieces, and then look at how they all work together to achieve a final effect. This time, however, rather than looking at the language in a small section, you're being asked to look at how the whole text is put together. The mark scheme assesses you on 3 skills: how well you can comment on the order things happen in and why, how well you can use a range of examples, and how well you can use specific terminology related to structure. I'd like you to think about text structure as building blocks. The writer can choose which building blocks to include and which order to put them in. These choices create different effects. Activity 2 helps to demonstrate this. To identify the building blocks in the Brighton Rock extract from last lesson, start by skim reading it again. If it helps, go back to the tutorial and listen again to it being read aloud. Identify the main focus of each paragraph and write a heading for each of the paragraphs in the blocks. The first 2 have been done in your workbook as an example. Press pause, complete activity 2A, and then press play to move on. You can now see an outline of the structure of the text. Imagine the images appearing like a film, first focusing on Hale, alone, then the crowds arriving in Brighton, then back to Hale and his daily schedule. From here, some backstory about his job and a further short paragraph clearly linking the backstory with Hale being in Brighton now, before coming back to the main story where he finishes his drink and continues on his daily schedule. In paragraph 7, he watches the crowd, and finally we move back to focus on Hale again. All of this helps make us curious about Hale at the same time as feeding us information gradually. But what would happen to the text if the writer had chosen a different sequence? For activity 2B, I'd like you to explore the effects of making a different choice about the sequence of the paragraphs. How would it change the tone, the genre, or the reader's experience? Select any of the blocks other than 1 or 8. Imagine that the writer had chosen to start with this block rather than the short paragraph about Hale feeling uneasy, and explain the effect. Press pause, complete the activity, and then press play to move on. Let's look first at what might happen if we started with the background information about Hale's job. Obviously, we would need to change some of the words to help it make sense, but we're more interested on the impact on the reader of introducing the book to us in this way. Now, because the story is being told in a chronological order, the tone seems much more matter-of-fact and straightforward. Hale's job is interesting, but not really mysterious, and we don't feel as a reader like we're going to have to work hard to solve clues that the writer sprinkles into the story for our pleasure. So the genre seems different, as does our understanding of Hale and the direction the story is going in. Now try starting the story with the crowds arriving in Brighton. This time, the first thing we see is a wider view of the setting of Brighton on a bank holiday weekend. It seems like paradise, and there's no hint of the suspense of the crime story that lurks in the back of our minds in the original. This seems like a very different type of story again. So we can see that as a writer's structural choices have just as much effect as those of language. The wording of question 3 is very similar each year. This question says, you now need to think about the whole of the source. This text is from the opening of a novel. How has the writer structured the text to interest you as a reader? You could write about what the writer focuses your attention on at the beginning, how and why the writer changes this focus as the source develops, and any other structural features that interest you. The best answers use terminology well and explain the effects of structural features in this text specifically. The mark scheme is assessing you on 3 skills. How well you can comment on the order things happen in and why, how well you can use a range of examples, and how well you use structure terminology. I'd now like us to analyse structural features in this text. I've selected 4 for you. Firstly, the effect of the opening sentence. Next, the cyclical structure of the extract, the way the end echoes the beginning. Thirdly, the temporal or time references. And finally, the use of the omniscient narrator to shift the focus. Press pause and complete activity 3, and then press play when you're ready to move on. The opening sentence is very effective at raising questions in the reader's mind. Hale knew before he'd been in Brighton 3 hours that they meant to murder him. This opening sentence reveals which town we're in, that Hale has only just arrived there, and that someone wants to kill him. This last piece of information shocks the reader and hints that the story might be a crime thriller. However, it withholds information about who wants to kill him and why, and we don't yet know if Hale is an innocent victim or a criminal himself, so readers are intrigued to find out more. The cyclical structure, beginning and ending with Hale being alone and uneasy, and reminding the reader of his inky fingers and bitten nails, keeps the central question about Hale's identity uppermost in our minds. And the repeated reference to time build up tension, showing that Hale is under pressure. The writer's choice of omniscient narration allows him at some points to narrow the focus, concentrating only on Hale, and then to widen the focus to look at the large crowds moving through Brighton, highlighting the contrasting moods and his isolation. We're now going to look at some more examples of analytical paragraphs from student answers. Again, they're both good answers and meet all of the criteria in the skills checklist. For activity 4, I'd like you to read through the paragraphs and annotate where they meet the different skills on the checklist, and then identify what exactly makes the level 4 answer better. Press pause, complete activity 4, and press play when you're ready to move on. Both of the answers explain clearly the order things happen in and offer some comment on why. The level 4 answer is better, as some of the observations about how the text shifts the focus at certain points are more sophisticated, and the comments on the effects on the reader are more detailed. However, even this level 4 answer doesn't quite explain the precise effects of some of the features, like the references to time, and some opportunities to use terminology like cyclical structure and focus are missed. Think about how you might be able to do each of these things better in your own answer. For your final task today, I'd like you to use your notes from activity 3 to write your own full answer to the structure question. Make it as detailed as you can, as you will be able to use what you have written today in your assessment next week. Good luck with the task, and I look forward to our next lesson on the evaluation question next week.